improved. But what actually got us from who built those building blocks that support all charities? So it's not a case of looking at individual charities. How did they develop their first website, first email campaign? That's too vast a subject. We're looking at the tools that helped establish services for and approaches, digital fundraising, for example, for all charities. And Sarah and I met each other at the beginning of that. We were both truly fortunate in being around in the right place at the right time. We both also took our opportunities. So I have a huge amount of respect for what Sarah achieved. And you'll get our stories woven into this session today. First of all, I'll be the first to admit that there are many people in and outside the charity sector who don't see what's happening right in front of them, even if it affects them and their business and their charity, their organisation. So this is a wonderful quote from William Rees, Engineer-in-Chief of the British Post Office in 1879. And he was talking about the telephone, and he was nonplussed by it, really. Didn't really think it was going to affect society at all in the UK. He saw a difference between America and the UK. But there are conditions in America which necessitate the use of instruments of this kind more there than here. Here, we have a superabundance of messengers, errand boys, and things of that kind. So it's all very fun, all very enjoyable to poke fun at him, but equally many of us find it difficult to spot what is happening and how we can make the best use of that. So his experience is always a useful reminder that we shouldn't get too full of ourselves for being ahead of the game. This is the first topic we're going to look at. This is going to be technology and infrastructure, going to remind us of some of the tech and the difficulty in moving the charity sector forward. Whether you've spotted the importance of digital, and we didn't call it digital then, it was the World Wide Web, all with capitals, and email with a hyphen or dash between the E and the mail. So different times. Sarah and I put together this reminder, this quick snapshot of the different decades. So while we try to focus on the beginning, we're going to show the overall arc of where all this ended up and what kicked in here and there. You'll see lots of different things there. We've chosen a few tech sector issues, developments, but also some charity developments, trying to put them in some kind of order and context. And we're actually going to start by asking you a question. Who can say in the chat the date on which Wikipedia was founded, and who can remember which year Google was founded? So, given a lot of what Sarah and I are talking about is before both of those, that's a clue. Let us know what you think with your in the chat, and we'll see who gets closest to that. If there are any other dates you think really should have been in there, then by all means put those in the chat as well, and we'll have a look and see what you think was important. So we've got the first digital jobs in charities. I can remember seeing the first one of those in a newspaper at the time, before job advertising moved entirely online. So how did we move forward? First of all, we were inspired by a tiny group of people in the UK and internationally. We were very lucky to be, once you got email at work or at home, you suddenly found you were in a really good approach. Oh, Jane, very, very good. She got it right. Wikipedia, 2001, and Google, 1998. So very, very good, spot on. Either a good memory or a very quick use of Google. Very impressive. So how do we get to know and teach ourselves what was going on? There was no training courses in this. There were some wonderful books at the time. So The Whole Internet by Ed Kroll was just a Bible. Wonderful style, lots of useful information. But we also, once we had access to some of these tools, explored more. So I can remember experiencing some of the predecessors to the web: Jughead, Gopher, and Waze. Kudos to Sarah in the credits there, in the discussions. And at the time, I was just trying to talk to anyone who'd be interested. I talked to charities, to sector publishers, I talked to the umbrella bodies. I even had a friend who was working at the BT Research Labs and saying, look, what are charities doing with this? What could they do? One particularly useful group was the US email groups. There were lots of email discussion lists by US fundraisers. So that's how we learned. It was definitely sort of bootstraps and just finding anyone with a shared interest. Oh, good one. Good question from Sarah in the chat there. Facebook or LinkedIn, which came first? And this is part of our memory. Sarah, do you want to join in and say this is part of your collection, what we can see on screen?
Yes, thank you. I just became fascinated by the fact that everywhere I went, there would be a CD-ROM. It was offering you both dial-up access, but also some instructions, and probably one of the early browsers. You might have seen on our timeline slide, there were a lot of wars between browsers at that time, but it was trying to get you to use a preferred browser in partnership with perhaps Netscape or Internet Explorer. And they were at supermarket checkouts. You would go to WH Smith for a book and you would find one there. They were just absolutely everywhere. You could not move for an internet dial-up CD. And I started to collect a seriously stupid amount of them, not really knowing why. But for this presentation and looking back, I'm delighted to say that there were also third sector organizations thinking in this way as well. We must get more charities online. So I don't know if you can spot in there that we've got a partnership between Eurythmics supporting Amnesty International. We've got Care for Free, which was an internet service with a sort of social aspect to it. And then we've also got another one that was done in conjunction with Charity Times, Charity Buyer's Guide and Charity Logistics.
And I think Sarah's going to be sharing a link to give you an audio reminder of just how memorable those days were, an audio that you just couldn't avoid if you wanted to go online. So here are just a few snapshots of some publications of that time, early days. Look at that, they really are quite dated. Not really any interaction, although I can spot that the CAF online site does actually have some drop downs, so you can actually choose different places to go to. Whereas the other two sites, the Amnesty site and UK Fundraising, hardly any images and no real interaction available beyond clicking the links. In those days, one of the development of digital fundraising and the whole notion of services that enable that and other charity ideas was dogged by jargon, which changed quite a lot. So for a while, the key aim for many charities or sector providers was to become the portal for charities. So portal was a big word for a while. I think now it's hubs, but generally it moved around. There was quite a while where everything had to have the E prefix. So e-fundraising, e-funding, e-training, I suppose e-learning. Most of that has disappeared, but it was rather. This is CharityNet. Sarah, do you want to speak to the Charities Aid Foundation's CharityNet?
Yes, thank you. I think all I would say is that I felt really quite surprised and proud at the time of joining the Charities Aid Foundation in 1994 that they were as interested in us helping the sector, so other charities, to get online, as for me, as I think I was called new media manager at the time, to help them internally develop digital products and services so that they could embrace the web. So CharityNet was one of those initiatives that was, externally facing. It was the CAF's way of encouraging charities to think about the World Wide Web, understand it a bit better. And we were also trying to provide support. So we partnered with a dial-up ISP. I can't completely remember the name, but it was something like KD Digital or something. And we also started to put out one of our own CD-ROMs. And if you found that, if you posted it or if you found it somewhere else, then you would go online and you would land on charitynet.org, and we would begin to try to give you some understanding of how digital could be important to your organization. And also we would offer you a free website, which I was building in my spare time.
I love that distinction between initially content and then services. And I think that was quite a key development that not all organizations or infrastructure organizations managed, but there was definitely a digital element of services which was very, very good to see. So this is all starting from scratch. This is with no models to follow. So we'll come to some of our two different stories, how we dealt with that. Eventually, other sector bodies started coming on board. There was some delay, so the Institute of Fundraising took until about until 2000 to create its own publication. So there was no overall sudden lurch forward within 12 months or anything. It was actually a matter of years before the sector moved online, the sector infrastructure bodies, either existing ones or ones that arose out of a need. So all of these were fairly early on in various formats. Charity Commission, I can remember launching a site, but at the same time, you could never access its register of charities. So searching the register of charities was still an in-person experience. You had to trek to one of the Charity Commission offices in various parts of the country. And I remember even when it did come online initially, it had that weird function of you could search it, but only Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. So if you're ever doing any searching on charities or funders on the Charity Commission website, at one point, this is a long time ago, it worked in office hours, which made me smile. So where are we now? There have been huge gains in the past 30 years in terms of all the provision out there. Some really impressive developments. Tools like 360 Giving, which just combine huge amount of funding data and funding experience all in one, which is marvelous. Some great support services, tech for common good. And actually the Charity Commission's website just gets better and better and more useful. So a huge amount of gains, but also some gaps. So we'll try and mention those in due course, or perhaps you have a few that you can suggest as well. I'm going to move on to the second piece before I hand over fully to Sarah. We're looking at the ideology of getting started, of starting something from nothing with just the vaguest notion that something needed to be done, which is kind of the story of most charities when they get founded. At the heart of all of this was a kind of very naive with hindsight, but actually very powerful sense that we were at a real tipping point where tech tech publishing and communication was suddenly open to everyone who was not a tech head. We guessed that and just ran with it. So, and at the heart of certainly the World Wide Web was a very, very pro-social, very liberal and equitable approach. So the whole idea behind that Tim Berners-Lee came up with was the universality of the web. And we drank that in happily, and that we saw it as a tool for charities to use. So there was definitely a period of optimism and a desire to make the best and fastest use of this new free tool that technically was available to everyone and could be used for good. Kudos to Gary Wilkinson. Gary's in the audience today, so thank you for that. I promised I would share something. He came up with a really good quote. He got the idea of sharing some of the funding information that he used to provide. I think he was probably the first to do so online. He had a print publication, good old Aldous PageMaker from Apple Mac days. So a print publication that he transferred online, but with the notion of breaking down the silos and the access to information. So even it was his business, so it was a profit-making approach, but still a very open, collaborative approach that he took on. So hats off to Gary. The only way to get this going, my background on this was, how did I get involved? Because when I went to school and university, there were no computers for me to access, and I did history, so I definitely would never have touched a computer. So I decided to do a part-time master's in information science. Something made me, in the early 90s, realize that digital, even though we didn't call it digital then, mattered. So that's how I was really lucky to get access to the internet and the web at City University in London in the evenings when I was fundraising for Amnesty during the day. My story is just good timing and just the desire to actually make some of this happen because no one else seemed to be doing it. And there was wonderful pushback from all kinds of organizations, which just made me happier to try and push further forward. Janet, the joint network run by the universities of the UK, would not allow a discussion list to be set up on the subject of fundraising, even though every university was involved in fundraising or development. But eventually they did allow one. It wasn't mine, it was Admin Develop, which was pretty much the first email discussion forum, the ability to share context my apologies, not Gary Wilkinson, Gary Wiltshire. Dear, oh dear, Gary, I'm so sorry, it is age. That is my very poor excuse. Dear, oh dear. So lots of tools, lots of pushback, but generally talking to people and evangelizing was really what got us forward. The idea was to actually make things. I pass on to Sarah. This is Sarah's story. How did you get into digital, Sarah?
Yeah, and just before, Gary, thank you, because I've been thinking quite often today, as Howard and I have been finding some moments to put this together, that we've done what every enthusiast and all-out nut does, which is give ourselves a surplus of material, whilst recognizing that 30 years on, we've got a lot of memory gaps. So you've just spotted a really large one. Sorry for the wrong name, and thanks for correcting.
It's all right, you're forgiven.
Thank you. Instant forgiveness. Thank you. My story was interesting too, because what I love about, charting these 30 years is that I wasn't technical and I had no intention of being technical. I thought I was seeing the cusp of a kind of society for everyone. Like Howard, I bought in completely to the idea that society wasn't working for everyone, but here at last was a chance for us to have a share, play to win, have a voice. And then I quickly realized that you've just got to get technical. You've got to learn things that you've never done before if you do want to be, if you do want to participate. So very, very briefly, when I first became aware of the Charities A Foundation, I applied actually to work in their publishing department. And I had an interview. Jane, I know that you're here today. I think this gentleman's name was David Moncrief. I think he was the head of publishing at the Charities A Foundation at the time. This was 1995, just before I joined. And throughout the interview, I kept talking about the World Wide Web, because previously I'd presented on the topic of the World Wide Web at a kind of business kind of competition in the southeast of England. And I kept saying, but have you thought about this aspect in publishing, and have you thought about the other? And eventually he went, Sarah, it feels to me that you've got a deeper passion and it's not publishing, and maybe you'd like to go away and think more about your web ideas for the Charities A Foundation and write us a note. But I'm feeling, that at the moment that you're probably not the best candidate for the job. And I said, oh, you're probably right. I'll write a note. So I wrote a 2-page paper on how the web could help the charity sector, and sent it into CAF and just received some thanks. And 6 months later, they created a job from scratch. And of course, that has to go out in the open. So they let me know and said, would you like to come along and interview for that position? And again, I just emphasize that this was the spirit at the time there. They wanted me to work to digitalize their organization, but at the same time to bring others along, to do this in a spirit of openness and working with others and working for the social good and not just for one organization's gain.
Working with others was a core part of the development of all these initial infrastructures. The charity sector does work together well. Certainly people with a passion and a shared interest do find each other. So there's a huge amount of communications online and in person as well. All kinds of groups that once you've got access to the internet, you could start finding out other people with shared interests and watching what was going on internationally. And these are just some of them that I remember. Definitely a sense of optimism and self-help, and no one's stopping you doing it, really, beyond lack of interest and lack of funding, which we'll mention soon. And one of my favorites was the NFP tweet up, the not-for-profit Twitter meetup. So once people, this is obviously in the 2000s after the launch of Twitter in 2007, maybe 2006. So group of people who just saw the potential of using Twitter for social good and just started meeting up together. So that was one of the powerful approaches. Talking about coming together and enabling anyone to come together, one of the better developments was the accessibility guidelines to make sure the web was as accessible as it could. It's still not there, but crikey, what a lot of development has happened. And there are charities that specialize that, and charities that fight the good fight to make all digital tools fully accessible. So that's just a timeline nod to that. And I think, talking of timelines, there's also a wonderful timeline developed by a group of fundraisers, which I saw Marina in the group, I think. So if Marina, you want to share your timeline, the history timeline, that would be lovely as well. I'm going to finish off my section and hand over to Sarah, or hand over for a break for everyone to join in. I'm going to suggest, has anyone spotted any ideological gains in the last 30 years of using the internet? Have the good times finished, or is there still the possible ability to do good online using digital tools? And in case you can't read that, that is the fantastic original cartoon which says, "On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog."
If I can just nip in there and
Me up now. So I'm just about to share. How are we doing?
Yeah, all good.
Do we have a large blue slide on screen?
We do.
Hang on a minute. I've got a small issue. Just a second. I've lost my control.
I will remind people to think up their questions, either to put them in or to write them down, or however you choose to communicate to yourself, so that we can have a good conversation and perhaps hear how some of the, maybe you were involved in early innovations in this area, and can tell us what your experiences were.
Small delay. Sorry, can I just check something? Are you seeing me move through a slide?
No, it's still on innovation and impact, the original one.
Okay, lovely. So I'm going to try and take us rapidly again, but so that we can have plenty of time for discussion at the end, through a kind of innovation impact journey. Again, something of a whistle-stop tour, hard to encapsulate 30 years, particularly with memory gaps. So please do add anything into the chat that you can think of that looks like signs of innovation entering the charity sector or impact in ways that we couldn't previously achieve. So I started with some headline stories because really, in the early days, innovation, if you were a charity, was after the pain of getting yourself online and dealing with dial-up, was really having a website. Then it was having a website that you updated. Then it was shifting from sending emails to organizing yourself into email as a communications tool, so perhaps having a newsletter. And of course, importantly, it was having a donation page. And the headlines here come from UK fundraising. That's where we were all going to find out about the latest and best activities in the sector. I remember that when I joined CAF in 1996, I was told almost instantly that, you know, the oracle, the place to look and the person to speak to would be this website in Howard Lake. And that's why we met in such early days. And we've got headlines here from 1994, 2004 and 2015. But I would say that although charities were starting to produce donation pages, and thinking back some slides when we saw Amnesty webpage, CAF and CharityNet, the Amnesty page was a very static web page, and giving was even more transactional online than it was offline. It was quite difficult for donors to get a good thank you, for example, at the end of clicking through and putting in their information to make a donation. But we were starting out. Some big things did start to happen. I don't know if anyone here can remember things like Donate for Mike or any of the other ideas that are on screen. But the revolution here was that anything that was an event-based fundraiser or sponsored fundraising actually for the first time raised you the funds before the event itself took place. So this was the flip around. People would, you know, raise the funds ahead of joining the actual event. And but we must remember that most charities back then had no digital hires within their organizations. if somebody did something to do with the World Wide Web, it was a small part of a, quite strained other role in which they probably also had 4 or 5 different hats they were wearing. So we were really dependent on third-party providers for the platforms that helped us run these sorts of things. And that means it was even more difficult for the smaller charities. And let's not forget that the smaller charities are the bulk of our sector. It was very difficult for them really to participate as much as they would want to and to get ahead. So we had some interesting market entrants. Some of them are listed there. Again, commercial providers. So if I've missed anyone, please pop them in the chat. I don't know if anyone can cast their minds back and remember what some of the first, websites and hubs or portals that they used were. As I say, most of them were probably provided by third parties, but I've also put on here for the latter stage of our journey that we did start to see organizations who set themselves up purely to help third sector organizations with social technology or the World Wide Web or the internet. So I've put CAST, which is the Centre for Access to Social Technology, and Catalyst there. And there were others, but I'm afraid in our next slide, we'll see that some of these are losses as well. Because there were lots of exits that came in the last 30 years as well. I don't think Howard and I really know why, but some of the big players like BT Giving and Virgin Money Giving, who went on for quite some years, suddenly started to exit the market. And we do have new giving platforms like Givey and so on, and Give and Gain, for example. But it's interesting that some of the big commercial players did leave the market. And I mentioned there that we did have also some coalitions that were trying to help the smaller charities catch up. So some of the books that were around at the time, I don't know if anyone here read anything that's on this list. Howard, I imagine, would have devoured all of them, and no doubt he was involved behind the scenes or directly with some of them as well. But it wasn't just about fundraising. These examples have been harder to scout for and look for this presentation. I did use something called the Wayback Machine. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. That is a brilliant archive, a kind of freeze in time of screen grabs of websites throughout the ages. And I tried to find some of them. I was trying to find when doit.org, because that's my first memory of a platform or a hub or a portal for volunteering came online. And I can't find the start date, but I think it was shut down somewhere in 2021. I also remember that some of the membership organizations like NCVO were launching online networks. Of course, you couldn't see inside unless you were a member, but they were starting to build components to their website that were member only. So we started to see gated or paywalled sections of websites that showed that, that online service provision was accompanying something that people were also receiving offline. And there were a few signs of open working as well around that time. Going the wrong way. My apologies. Okay. So bringing us up to the current time, where are we with internet infrastructure? Well, we've had quite a few years of the Charity Digital Skills Report, and we do see year after year that there is still quite a significant skills deficit in digital in most charities. Most charities are small. Most charities, I think the figure is something in the near 90% of charities are under 100,000 in income, annual income, and they are struggling really to deal with almost a digital divide within our sector itself, where the most visible, the most well-funded, well-resourced, or the charities with budgets can hire people who are specialists in new technologies and new communications channels and just new techniques, but most others find it very difficult. And we hit AI, and Howard, I think you in particular, I don't know if you want to come in, but you hear this quite a lot. we're talking about AI even when we feel that we're lagging behind with other social technology tools. And most people seem to be saying that it won't replace us. I wondered if you had any thoughts to add on that.
It's to me, it's a reflection of that Sir Charles Priest comment right at that we started this session with. I think the assumption that AI does, that digital does not change you because you're somehow different, I think is misplaced, and suggests not quite an openness to what's happening and what's coming. It may not be what you want, and digital scares people throughout because it represents substantial change. But yes, I'm looking forward to more positive attitudes to AI. I'm not saying AI itself is entirely positive. I'm very aware of some of the dangers and negative aspects of it. But in terms of what it can do and how fundraising fits in that, I think we need to retain a far more open mind to embrace what is happening now and make the most of it.
Thank you. And I think the inflection is that if you're under-resourced, in certain areas, underskilled sector, it's very difficult to be far-sighted. Very, very difficult. So charities will need a great deal of support to use AI effectively. I think not just for productivity within their organizations, perhaps, but also so that we can try and gain some of this ground that we wanted to win with this social revolution, with this spirit of, you know, the internet being a great equalizer and being, you know, really inclusive, when in fact what we've seen is it's not quite there. And we'll see this later on in these slides. It's not quite got where we want it to, but can we use AI for a leapfrog effect? Can we use it to try and, you know, take more control over the aspects of the conversation that the third sector has been a kind of, you know, quite quiet voice in? What crosses my mind is that we do have a charity digital divide. The largest charities are the most visible, will tend to receive the most donations. Will AI further exacerbate that? Or can it be used to democratize people's understanding of charities and what they really do? What are most charities doing around our country? And then equally, will AI give the general public a broader view of civil society, or will it just create more and more bias so they see less and less of what's really you know, available and going on out there? So we wanted to collect some learnings together. They're pretty difficult to collect because I think we're still in flux. We're still dealing with some digital lag at the same time as we're, you know, facing and trying to embrace new tools like ChatGPT. But we know that charities definitely lag behind, and that's something that we want to address. We've also seen, sadly, in the last few years that some of the organisations that did provide support, like the FSI or the Small Charities Coalition, are no longer operating. Their operating models were too thin for them to be sustainable and to continue funding themselves. And other forms of grant, including grant makers, seem at the moment, and I don't know why, to be giving fewer grants out for social technology or digital inclusion or digital transformation. And so the result here is that we haven't sufficiently invested inwardly in charitable organizations, and that funding gaps, you know, still exists. Meanwhile, if you look at fundraising and giving, as I've said, we know that the largest charities are the most visible, and so they tend to receive most of the donations. I think Arts Council England has a report that will show you that the 1% in this country by income give to almost what they call the top 50, a league table of top charity brands, and that's where most of the 1% are donating at the moment. And the rest of the public, of course, are donating more widely, especially if they can see charities active in their communities. But they're still also, like all of us, really, they're going to, you know, what's seen gets noticed, gets supported. So we have a real visibility problem. I think personally, it's a great shame that accessibility is still not universal, and we haven't really, you know, solved that particular problem. The spirit of the internet is denied when people cannot access new social tools, new democracy tools, new giving tools in the same way as fully able people can. But on a positive note, we are seeing that there's more voice, more share of voice. I do think that movements have grown. I do think that public advocacy is a lot better. And so in that sense, there is more of a public square, most certainly than there was 10 years ago, and let alone 30 years ago when Howard and I were grappling with all of this and making it up as we went along. Hopefully we can chat about this a bit more in our next gap. So this quote is from James at Nesta. So, really, he feels that we weren't getting to grips with things until the mid-2010s. So that's just another little example of kind of how we, we've been running to catch up. But we're happy that because, people who just wanted to get started somewhere and were willing to try anything, this means that we have kept records. I mentioned the Wayback Machine, UK fundraising has been archived. And also we do have some really high quality domain names and high search rankings for, lots of things that relate to the third sector, which I think is very important. So here are some of our major gaps. I always believe that we create along the way a kind of tech commons. And although Howard has said the charity sector cooperates well, and I guess you're right, when there's motivation, they do. I actually myself have seen just still a lot of kind of silo activity and some competitive activity. So I'd really like to see a social tech commons come together. I think I'm having a problem with slides going in the wrong direction again.
I think that's fine.
So we thought we'd put down some actions for debate, some things that we think are important for us all to be mindful of going forwards. Here are a few of them. I do want to draw attention to the last one. I would say that over my 30 years, I've done different sort of aspects of volunteer support for other charities and smaller charities. But it's only in the last 10 years that I started to try and mentor and skill share more. And I really want to give a little shout out to something called Digital Candle. That's a service where a charity can ask literally any question to do with digital. And Catalyst, who support it, and I think they're called Platypus, the social web agency that support the technology, will send that out to a growing network of volunteers and mentors who will try and get on a quick call and help that charity through it. And then my next thing that I would really push for would be more interoperable standards and utilities, things like application programming interfaces that connect things together. One example would be as 360 Giving develops better data standards and collects more data. Where else can we share that? What can we integrate it with that makes it easier for people to find charities in their community that they want to support, that they think have evidence of impact, and so on and so forth. So, plenty to achieve with actions that take us from what we knew before to what we're doing today, and then move us into what will make us a stronger digital collective in the future. But there are some gnarly questions still to ask, so I thought I would ask them now. Please start putting things in the chat and bring them into the discussion. And we're going to end on a couple of quotes. But do you think the internet's made it easier to give or to volunteer or to get involved as a trustee, for example? Do you think that the World Wide Web has made things more normative, more, has it socialized them better than they were before? Is it easier to build technology? I think it is, but obviously I was reading those crazy books like Howard all that time ago. So I feel like there's a tool somewhere, anywhere that will help me get something done. But I don't know if people generally feel that kind of can do. I can be a maker and a builder myself. Do we think that more people are building in civil society? To Jane's point, do we think that more people are getting involved in civil society because of the web presences that almost ubiquitously charities have? And actually, for example, I'm trustee of a charity that is digital first and digital only at the moment, just registered with the Charity Commission a month ago, and our whole service provision will be online only. So, perhaps I'm not seeing all of the great changes, but I'd love to know what you think. And so we just wanted to end.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Carry on.
Just a couple of quotes, because I think Tim Berners-Lee had great ambitions. He built great optimism around him, and he's not changed his tune. He's still saying similar things today than he was then. So just a couple of quotes. And this one at the end, which is, the web as I envisaged it, we have not seen yet. The future is still so much bigger than the past.
Oh, that's a fantastic way to end. Thank you very much indeed, Howard and Sarah, for that. Howard, could I ask? There's some really fascinating things on the some links being put on the chat.